Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
More is happening in a day than would previously happen in a month. More is happening in a month on the agenda of the New World Order than what happened previously in a year or even a decade. This is going to be one of the most important broadcasts I have ever done today. It is the 28th day of January, 2009. I rescheduled a guest last week because I was covering the aftermath of the Obama coronation, Reverend Kevin Annett, who documents that they are still killing Native Americans in Canada.
He's the T-Rex of political talk. Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
I will do a more detailed analysis of new legislation authorizes FEMA camps in the United States and how they're going to sell the public on it, exactly how the camps will operate, how they're going to induct the people into them, how they're going to publicly try to sell the population on going along with it. This is a maximum alert here against tyranny, ladies and gentlemen. But today's first guest dovetails with this, sadly. Reverend Kevin Annett, Kevin Daniel Annett. He's written the Hidden from History, the Canadian Holocaust. And you know about Native Americans in the U.S. being taken to reservations, being given smallpox blankets, being hunted down, being killed, breaking up their families, kidnapping their children if they didn't kill them, if they were lucky, I guess, sending them to boarding schools where mysteriously most of them would end up dying. It's eugenics. And that's continued right through to today. George Bush ran the eugenics program when he was working for Nixon, and 40+% of the Native American women on reservations were sterilized when they would just go in for medical checkups. But it's also going on in Canada. So if you don't think this can go on in institutions and abuses don't go on by design, these government institutions, you got another thing coming. An infrastructure protection under the family planning, which is all eugenics, under all of this, they're carrying out these operations. So we've got him on to break down what's happening up there and how he discovered just one area, one little microcosm he was in and what he saw. Kevin, good to have you here with us.
Hi, Alex. It's good to have me be here.
Tell us about yourself and then just boil it down for people what you witnessed.
Well, when I was ordained as a United Church minister, the United Church is the largest Protestant church in Canada. It was actually set up by the government of Canada in 1925. And with the government, they jointly ran these, I don't even like to call them residential schools. They were internment camps. We know that half the children died in them, so it's a misnomer to call them schools. But when I got ordained into the United Church, one of my first postings was out on the west coast of Vancouver Island, a place called Port Alberni, which had really been the center of the whole missionary invasion that happened there in the late 1800s. And my first week on the job, I encountered Native people who began talking to me about children, friends of theirs, who had been killed in the local Alberni residential school that was run by my church at the time, the United Church. So, in a nutshell, what I did is I began to look into that. I invited people to come into the church. I had an open pulpit policy so people could get up and talk. And we began to hear more of these stories. And when I took it to the church authorities at the time, this would have been in 1992 to 94, before any of the lawsuits had begun, the church's position was basically they're all lying, they're making it up, don't listen to them. And I was warned in no uncertain terms that, I'd better stop looking into this stuff. Well, what brought things to a head was after being on the job for a couple of years, I'd swelled my congregation to about 100 people from the 20 it was when I got there. One of the things I began to find out is that there was a whole history of land theft. The churches had been, in Canada, they were given vast acreages by the government. The Crown in Canada, they claim to own all the land. And so they parceled out native land to various churches. And these churches would then sell it off to various corporate benefactors. In this case, big logging company, including Weyerhaeuser, the American multinational logging company. they got all of this native land through the United Church. So I found out about that, and I wrote a letter about it, and I was fired within 4 weeks of doing that, without charge, without cause or notice or anything.
And it's always the same. They say, oh, we're giving in trust all this native land to this church, which was chartered by the government. It is the government.
Yep.
So it all looks good in the press, and then as soon as people aren't looking, they hand it over to private interests, just like the phony environmental groups here in Austin stealing everybody's land, and then 2-3 years later building malls on it. So, again, this is their favorite scam. And just today I'm covering how they've got 26,000 preachers as part of a secret clergy response team, now public, who are preparing to tell the American people to go to similar camps. So they've done this over and over again. Please continue.
Well, that's the thing, Alex. That's a very important point, because in Canada especially, there is no separation of church and state. There's church and government have been working hand in glove with private interest right from the beginning. Under the guise of bringing education and quote, civilization to the native people, it was a huge land theft operation, and they have their puppet chiefs in there helping them seize the land and sign bogus treaties. The reality is that it's a history of genocide that's continuing. And I began to experience that in a real way in Port Alberni. I didn't close the door. I opened it up more and more to these survivors of this genocide. And when I wrote the letter about the land deal that had gone on between the United Church and a company called Macmillan Bloedel, which was bought up by Weyerhaeuser, when I exposed that corporate church connection, I was shown the door very quickly. But what happened in the years following that, really the church went out of their way to try to destroy my life. They went to my wife and offered to help pay for her divorce if she would leave me, which she did, and she got custody of her 2 daughters. They systematically prevented me from getting work. They blocked my doctoral degree I was studying for at the University of British Columbia because I was continuing to give a forum and a voice to survivors of the residential schools. In the year or two after I was fired, I began to get invited to gatherings in downtown Vancouver, where I'd been working for a number of years as a street minister. And people began to tell stories, survivors, of things that went way beyond the sexual and physical assault that had been reported in the media. People were describing sterilization programs, having witnessed murders, pedophile networks that are still operating in the native world involving very high-powered politicians. All of these things coming out. So we began to document this. We held a tribunal in 1998. I published 2 books about it, and finally our film Unrepentant, which came out a couple of years ago. And it was all, I'm pretty obviously in response to this, the government last year was forced to start acknowledging that children had died en masse, in their tens of thousands in these schools, in these death camps, really. So it's really been a process of persistence and just allowing the survivors to continue to speak and finding the documentation which supports them. I was able to find... And it's a problem,
and we'll get into that documentation, but for those that don't know, I have a stack of mainstream Canadian papers admitting that large portions of the children just died. So it's on record now, and another testament to you over more than a decade fighting and losing almost everything you had, but in the end, exposing this evil, so hopefully they can't continue carrying it out at least the level they were. And by the way, something else I didn't mention to listeners today, it's coming up later. We have been threatened by Larry Silverstein, directly by his people, to shut up. And I'm going to just say something. We're not shutting up about anything. We're committed to humanity, and I put it all in God's hands. And no matter what happens to me, no matter if people destroy me, set me up, or God forbid a bolt of lightning strikes me, I put my life in God's hands. I know you've done that, Reverend. And I just want to say, folks, we are going in against classic tyranny that is radically expanding right now. So later, I'll get more into some new developments there. So they are persecuting all of us. That's why we all need your support. But continue. Let's specifically get in to what they now admit was going on. And the same thing,